This is what happens when corrupt cops finally meet the wrong person.
In this video, we'll delve into encounters where individuals assert their rights when dealing with law enforcement officers. Let's explore these situations in greater detail to gain a deeper understanding of the complexities and nuances that can arise during such interactions. Upholding and protecting one's rights when engaging with law enforcement is a fundamental aspect of a democratic society. Now, let's delve into some instances where individuals assert their rights when dealing with law enforcement officers, demonstrating that at times, it's the officers who may find themselves in challenging situations due to their actions and decisions. In the first scenario, the encounter began with a police officer approaching an individual who was openly recording their actions. The officer immediately demanded the person's ID and date of birth, which raised questions about the officer's motivations. The individual, keenly aware of their rights, declined to provide this personal information, explaining that they were protected by their right to privacy. Despite the individual's polite and respectful demeanor, the officer continued to press for their ID and date of birth. However, the individual remained steadfast, maintaining that their right to privacy and not incriminating themselves were fundamental rights.
Lower your camera. You're welcome to videotape me, but civilians don't have to be videotaped.
We'll see when your supervisor gets here. Why you keep approaching me?
He's heading out into traffic. I'm going to have to detain him if he heads out into traffic.
As the interaction unfolded, the individual informed the officer that they were live streaming the encounter to an audience of thousands. This transparency was a powerful tool in ensuring accountability and preventing any potential misuse of authority. The situation grew increasingly tense when the officer threatened to arrest the individual for not complying with their demands. The individual's response was assertive, stating that they hadn't committed any wrongdoing and accusing the officer of attempting to retaliate against them for their previous words or actions. During this exchange, the individual drew attention to the officer's aggressive body language and refusal to provide a clear reason for the stop, making it evident that they were well prepared to stand up for their rights. In the end, the officer decided to issue a ticket to the individual, who allowed it to fly away symbolically. This action underlined the individual's commitment to defending their rights and the assertion that any arrest would jeopardize the officer's qualified immunity. In another case, the encounter began with a police officer pulling over a motorist. The officer's tone and attitude were immediately unwelcoming and unprofessional, setting a negative tone for the interaction. The motorist, understandably uncomfortable with the officer's behavior, requested to know the reason for the stop. However, the officer failed to provide a clear explanation. The lack of transparency in the officer's demeanor raised concerns for the motorist, who sought clarity and respectful treatment during the encounter. The situation took a troubling turn when the officer reportedly called the motorist a loser, an unprofessional and derogatory remark. Although not captured on camera, the motorist asserted that this name-calling had occurred. The officer vehemently denied using such language. As the exchange continued, the motorist took the initiative to request a supervisor's presence, believing that a higher-ranking officer might bring a more reasonable perspective to the situation. However, the officer's conduct escalated as he insisted on detaining the motorist for filming near the police vehicle, even though this was within the individual's rights. A disagreement ensued about the legality of such actions, with the motorist citing the law that requires officers to identify themselves upon lawful request. This further fueled the tension between the two parties. The interaction became more intense with the arrival of another police vehicle, which was initially assumed to be a supervisor. However, the original officer continued to harass the motorist, asserting that filming was illegal. Ultimately, the situation ended when additional officers provided their names and badge numbers. The original officer left the scene, but not before an uncomfortable and confrontational interaction had taken place. In another event, the encounter involved a police officer who had pulled over an individual. The officer promptly requested the individual's driver's license, but the individual questioned the reason for the stop.
Driver's license, proof of insurance.
What'd I do?
I'll use driver's license and I'll explain it to you.
I'm working on it. No, what'd I do first? Why you pull me over?
Get your driver's license.
No, what did you pull me over for? Tell me that first.
Sir, let me explain something to you.
And what's your, I know the law. No, you have to tell me why you pull me over.
I don't have to tell you.
This simple inquiry was met with an unwillingness to provide a clear response. The situation escalated when the officer attempted to physically remove the individual from their vehicle. This action was particularly troubling as it seemed to be a disproportionate use of force, given the circumstances. The tension further increased when the officer threatened to use a taser. This threat was a significant escalation in the encounter and was perceived as unwarranted by the individual. Despite the mounting pressure, the individual remained resolute in their refusal to comply with what they believed to be an unjustified use of authority. The individual argued that there was no valid reason for the stop, underlining their determination to uphold their rights and question the actions of the officer. This led to a standstill, with both parties firmly holding their ground. Eventually, the officer decided to issue a ticket to the individual, who chose not to escalate the situation further and accepted the ticket. In another case, an individual was driving their vehicle on a public road when they were pulled over by a police officer. The officer's initial reason for the stop was unclear, as they did not immediately inform the driver of the violation or the purpose of the stop. This lack of transparency was a source of frustration for the driver. Upon approaching the vehicle, the officer demanded the driver's identification and registration. The driver, fully aware of their rights, inquired about the reason for the stop before complying with the officer's requests. They were seeking a clear explanation of the violation that led to the stop. The encounter took a troubling turn when the officer asked the driver if they had any drugs or weapons in the vehicle. This question raised concerns about an unwarranted search and seizure, as the officer had not established probable cause or provided a legitimate reason for the inquiry. The driver, upholding their rights, refused to consent to a search of their vehicle. They questioned the officer's motives and insisted that the officer should first explain the reason for the stop and any potential violation before proceeding further. This principled stand underscored the driver's commitment to safeguarding their Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable searches and seizures. The officer's continued insistence on searching the vehicle, despite the absence of probable cause, escalated the situation. The driver firmly maintained that the officer needed to respect their constitutional rights. Despite the tense exchange, the driver's commitment to their rights prevailed. The officer eventually decided to issue a citation for a minor traffic violation, concluding the encounter without a search of the vehicle.
Passed their proposal, and it comes after both Oklahoma and Florida passed laws that could punish people for posting videos online that include officers' personal information. Valerie Castro now with the push to restrict recordings.
In another case, an individual was peacefully exercising their First Amendment rights by recording a public demonstration in a city park. The demonstration involved a group of activists protesting a local issue. The person recording, hereafter referred to as the filmer, was not directly participating in the protest, but was there to document the event as a concerned citizen and amateur journalist. As the filmer was capturing footage of the protest with their camera, a police officer approached and questioned their presence. The officer's inquiry revolved around the reason for filming and demanded identification. The filmer, aware of their rights, calmly explained that they were exercising their First Amendment rights by documenting a public event and did not need to provide identification unless there was reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. The officer continued to press the filmer for identification, even suggesting that filming the protest might be construed as suspicious behavior. The filmer stood their ground, emphasizing that the act of recording in a public space was protected by the First Amendment. It also reminded the officer that no reasonable suspicion existed to warrant an ID check. As the interaction continued, a second officer arrived on the scene. The two officers briefly conferred, seemingly discussing the legality of the situation. Despite their initial skepticism, they eventually acknowledged the filmer's right to record the protest and refrained from providing identification. The 5 cases presented collectively underscore the paramount importance of understanding and asserting one's rights when encountering law enforcement officers. Regardless of the specific circumstances, these cases highlight the significance of individual knowledge, composure, and assertiveness in upholding constitutional rights and ensuring transparency and accountability in law enforcement interactions. One overarching lesson from these cases is that knowledge of one's rights is a powerful tool in safeguarding individual freedoms. These rights include the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, the Fifth Amendment's right to remain silent and have an attorney present during interrogations, and the First Amendment's guarantee of freedom of speech and the right to record public events. These rights are the foundation of a just and democratic society and serve as essential safeguards against potential abuses of power. Furthermore, these cases illustrate the diverse contexts in which these rights may be exercised. From traffic stops and police interrogations to documenting public events and protests, individuals must be prepared to assert their rights under various circumstances. In each case, the individuals displayed a remarkable ability to remain composed, confident, and informed, thereby ensuring that their rights were respected.